The store lights flickered overhead as Jake Carter stood behind the checkout counter, exhausted from another long shift. He had lost count of how many customers had passed through that day, each one focused on their own lives, their own struggles. But then she arrived. A young mother, barely 18, holding a small baby in one arm while fumbling through her purse with the other. Her face was flushed, her eyes darting between the total on the register and the few crumpled bills in her hand. I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't have enough." The store fell silent. Other customers shifted uncomfortably, some looking away, others watching to see what would happen next. Jake glanced toward the store manager's office, where Mr. Randall sat watching through the glass. He knew the rules. Employees weren't allowed to cover costs for customers. But then Jake looked at the baby in her arms, saw the quiet desperation in the mother's face, and in that moment, he made a choice. Without hesitation, he pulled out his own wallet and paid for the rest. The young mother's eyes filled with tears. She thanked him over and over. Jake didn't know it yet, but that simple act of kindness would cost him everything. Because the next morning, he was called into the manager's office. "You're fired." And then, less than 24 hours later, a helicopter landed outside his house. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe for more gripping real-life inspired stories, because what happens next, you won't believe it. Jake Carter sat in the manager's office, his hands resting on his lap, his heart pounding. He already knew what was coming. Across from him, Mr. Randall, the grocery store manager, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. His lips curled into a smirk of superiority. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair, a neatly pressed shirt, and a cold, businesslike demeanor. "You know why you're here, Carter?" Randall asked, tapping a pen against the desk. Jake swallowed hard but didn't answer. Randall sighed dramatically, flipping through a stack of papers. "You think you're some kind of hero? Giving away company merchandise like this is theft. You stole from this store." "I didn't steal anything," Jake replied, his voice calm but firm. "I paid for it with my own money." Randall's smirk disappeared. "Doesn't matter. Rules are rules. We don't allow handouts. It sets a bad precedent. Next thing you know, every employee thinks they can just hand out groceries to every sob story that walks in." Jake's jaw clenched. That wasn't just some sob story. She was a mother trying to feed her baby. Randall's expression remained cold. "Not my problem. And now, it's not yours either. You're fired. Clean out your locker." Jake felt a sharp pang of disbelief. He had worked there for 3 years, always showing up on time, never causing trouble. And now, for one moment of kindness, he was being thrown out like he meant nothing. He stood up slowly, locking eyes with Randall. "One day, you're going to regret this." Randall chuckled, shaking his head. "Doubt it. Now get out." Jake walked out of the office, his head low, his stomach twisting in frustration. At 22 years old, he had always been the kind of person who helped others, even when he had little himself. He had taken this cashier job straight out of high school, trying to save up for college, but life had a way of pulling him back down. Money was tight. Rent was due. His bank account barely had enough to last the month. Now he had no income, no backup plan, and no clue what to do next. Outside the store, Emily Walker stood by the entrance, rocking her baby in her arms. She had seen everything through the glass windows. She knew he had been fired because of her. Tears welled up in her eyes as guilt clawed at her chest. Emily was just 18 years old, barely holding her life together. She had aged beyond her years, her once bright blue eyes now tired and worried from nights of little sleep and endless worry. Her baby, Liam, whimpered softly against her chest. He was sick, and the baby formula Jake had helped pay for was the only thing keeping him fed. She felt helpless. Jake had worked at Evergreen Market, a small grocery store in their quiet town where everyone knew each other. The store had been there for decades, but in recent years, corporate greed had taken over. Prices had gone up. Hours had been cut. Employees were treated like numbers, not people. Mr. Randall ran the store like a dictator, always looking for ways to increase profits at the cost of human decency. As Jake walked through the store one last time, customers whispered to each other. Some shook their heads in sympathy. Others looked away, too afraid to stand up against Randall. Emily rushed toward him as he reached the door. "Jake, I'm so sorry," she said, tears threatening to spill. "You didn't have to do that for me." Jake forced a small smile even though his heart felt heavy. "It's okay. You needed help." "I'd do it again." She gripped his arm, desperation in her eyes. "I don't know how to repay you." Jake shook his head. "Don't worry about it, Emily. Just take care of Liam." With one last glance at the store that had once been his job, he walked out. He had no idea that his life was about to change forever, because the next morning he would wake up to something no one could have expected. The cold morning air hit Jake as soon as he stepped out of his small apartment. The memory of Mr. Randall's harsh words and the painful farewell from Evergreen Market still burned inside him. He had no job, no income, and the weight of his decision to help Emily Walker pressed on him with every step. As he trudged down the quiet street, his thoughts swirled. Questions of fairness, duty, and the price of kindness haunted him. He recalled the last moments at the store, Emily's tearful apology, his quiet promise to help, and the painful exit from the only place he'd ever worked. He had no idea that the next chapter of his life was about to unfold in the most unexpected way. Around mid-morning, as Jake made his way to a local diner in search of a hot meal and a moment to gather his thoughts, whispers and murmurs began circulating among the few early customers. Rumors had started spreading in the small town about a cashier who had been fired for showing compassion, a story that had already taken on a life of its own in hushed tones at the grocery store and in the nearby neighborhoods. Jake overheard snippets, phrases like "fired for kindness" and "something strange happened at Evergreen Market." Though he tried to ignore them, each word made him feel more exposed, as if his entire world was unraveling under public scrutiny. Inside the diner, a group of regulars clustered around a table, their faces lit with concern and curiosity. One of them, a middle-aged man with a graying beard, shook his head as he recounted the incident. "They say he gave away money for a struggling teen mom, and now he's paying the price," he murmured, barely audible above the low hum of conversation. Another customer, a young woman with determined eyes, added, "It's not right. People like him should be celebrated, not punished." The discussion continued in murmurs, setting the stage for a brewing conflict that Jake had never wanted to be a part of. Jake sat quietly, his appetite lost. His mind kept circling back to Emily, the teen mom who had looked at him with hope and desperation. He remembered her fragile voice saying, "I don't know how to repay you." And he had simply replied, "Just take care of Liam." But now, with his job gone, the kindness he had shown felt like an anchor pulling him down. He wondered if he had done the right thing, if his decision to help a stranger in need would ultimately lead to his downfall. Back at Evergreen Market, the consequences of that single act of kindness were already rippling through the establishment. Mr. Randall had immediately called security and documented everything. The footage of Jake discreetly covering the cost for Emily was passed along to corporate headquarters. In a swift decision that left little room for discussion, The company sided with Randall. Not only was Jake fired, but news of the incident had started circulating among employees and customers alike. Some employees, fearful of a similar fate, began distancing themselves from Jake, while others whispered about the potential for a larger story, one that might expose the harsh policies of a profit-driven management. By late afternoon, Jake's phone buzzed incessantly. His number was unknown, but curiosity urged him to answer. On the other end, a stern voice demanded to know if he was available for an interview about the kindness incident. The caller claimed to be from a local news station, eager to capture a story that could shake the community's perspective on corporate policies and compassion in the workplace. Jake hesitated. While the idea of sharing his story felt overwhelming, it also offered a glimmer of hope, a chance to fight back against the injustice he had suffered. As Jake reluctantly agreed to the interview, a spark of determination ignited within him. The incident at the store was no longer just about him. It had become a symbol of a larger issue, a reflection of a community caught between corporate greed and the simple acts of humanity that often go unrecognized. The murmurs in the diner, the whispers in the corridors of Evergreen Market, and the heated debates online all pointed to a growing unrest. Just when it seemed like the day couldn't get any more complicated, a final shock awaited him. The news interview was scheduled for early the next morning, but before that could happen, as twilight descended over the town, Jake noticed something unusual. A low, persistent hum filled the air, and as he stepped outside his building, his eyes widened in disbelief. Hovering above his street was the unmistakable silhouette of a helicopter. Its rotor blades cut through the quiet evening, casting long shadows over the pavement. In that moment, standing alone on the sidewalk, Jake's world tilted on its axis again. He had no idea what this new development meant or who could be behind it. But one thing was clear. His life was about to be turned upside down once more. And, as the helicopter's presence loomed ominously in the sky, a chilling thought crossed Jake's mind. This was only the beginning of a battle that was far larger than a simple act of kindness gone wrong. Jake stood frozen on the sidewalk, his eyes locked onto the helicopter hovering above his street. The steady hum of the rotor blades filled the air, sending a gust of wind through the narrow roads of his small town. The headlights of the aircraft illuminated his worn-out sneakers, casting long shadows against the pavement. His heart pounded. Who on earth would send a helicopter for him? Neighbors peeked out of their windows, some stepping onto their porches in curiosity. A few cars slowed down, drivers craning their necks to get a better look. It wasn't every day a helicopter landed in their quiet town. Then, the aircraft slowly descended onto the open field across the street. The door swung open, and out stepped a sharply dressed man in a tailored navy blue suit. He carried himself with confidence, his every movement deliberate. His expression was unreadable, serious, controlled, and powerful. Jake barely had time to react before a second person emerged from the helicopter. His breath hitched. Emily Walker. She held her baby close, her expression a mix of relief and anticipation. Jake could tell she had been waiting for this moment. But for what reason? The man in the suit strode toward Jake, his expensive shoes clicking against the pavement. The entire street was dead silent now, waiting for whatever was about to unfold. "Jake Carter?" The man's voice was crisp, carrying authority. Jake swallowed hard, taking a small step forward. "Yeah, that's me." The man extended his hand. "I'm Michael Lawson, Emily's father." Jake blinked. Emily's father? He quickly glanced at Emily, confusion written all over his face. She bit her lip, then nodded. "I was going to tell you, but everything happened so fast." Michael's piercing gaze never wavered. "You helped my daughter when she had no one. And now, I need to talk to you about what happens next." Jake hesitated before shaking his hand. The grip was firm, almost intimidating. This man wasn't just some concerned parent. He was a person with influence, power, and, most importantly, a plan. Minutes later, Jake found himself sitting inside the helicopter, completely out of his element. The interior was luxurious, far beyond anything he had ever experienced. Plush leather seats, a polished wooden table, tinted windows. It was clear this man wasn't just rich, he was powerful. Michael sat across from him, his gaze unwavering. Emily sat beside Jake, her baby asleep in her arms. The hum of the helicopter was the only sound for a moment before Michael finally spoke. "You lost your job because of a simple act of kindness," he began. "That should have never happened." Jake shifted in his seat. "I didn't do it for recognition. I saw someone who needed help." Michael nodded, his expression softening slightly. "And that's exactly why you're here. Men like you are rare. I don't trust many people, but anyone who would risk their own job to help my daughter and grandson. That's the kind of person I need in my company." Jake's brow furrowed. "Your company?" Michael leaned forward, clasping his hands together. "I own multiple businesses. Finance, logistics, technology. I've built my empire on the idea that people should be rewarded for doing the right thing, not punished. And yet, I see companies like the one that fired you, greedy, soulless, driven only by profit." Jake let out a slow breath, trying to process what was happening. "So, what exactly are you saying?" Michael smirked. "I'm offering you a job, Jake, a high-paying one, a real future. But more importantly, I want you to help me take down people like Randall." Jake's eyes widened. "Take down Randall?" Emily spoke up for the first time. "My father isn't just a businessman, Jake. He's been fighting against corrupt corporate leaders for years. And now, after what happened to you, we want to make sure this never happens to anyone else." Jake looked between them, his heart pounding. A day ago, he had been jobless and humiliated. Now, he was being offered an opportunity bigger than anything he could have imagined. Back at Evergreen Market, the fallout from Jake's firing had already begun. Customers had started boycotting the store, many demanding answers from management. The news story had gained traction online, with thousands of people calling out the store's unfair policies. Inside his office, Mr. Randall sat stiffly, watching, as an angry mob of customers refused to shop. His phone buzzed with endless complaints. Corporate was calling, but before he could answer, a different sound filled the air. The unmistakable whirl of a helicopter approaching. Randall rushed to the window, his eyes narrowing as he saw the luxury aircraft landing in the parking lot. And, stepping out, Michael Lawson. Randall's stomach dropped. The door to his office swung open and one of his employees rushed in, panic written all over her face. "Sir, the CEO of Lawson Enterprises is here, and he wants to speak with you, immediately." Randall felt his throat go dry. He had no idea what was coming, but deep down, he knew this was about Jake Carter, and he was about to lose everything. Mr. Randall stood frozen at the window, watching in growing panic as the helicopter touched down in the parking lot. Michael Lawson, a name that carried weight in the corporate world, was here. And Randall had a sinking feeling that he was the reason why. The store manager wiped the sweat from his brow, trying to compose himself. The last 24 hours had already been a disaster. Customers had started boycotting the store, and angry calls from corporate had poured in nonstop. And now, this. He hurried out of his office and into the store, where customers and employees alike gathered near the entrance, whispering. The presence of Michael Lawson, flanked by two assistants, and walking with purposeful authority, created a charged atmosphere. Even those who had no idea who he was could feel the shift in power. Randall forced a tight smile as he stepped forward. "Mr. Lawson, welcome to Evergreen Market. What brings you here today?" Michael stopped just a few feet away, his eyes scanning the store, before finally settling on Randall. His expression remained unreadable, but his tone, cold, calculated, dangerous. "You fired Jake Carter," Michael stated simply, his voice carrying absolute authority. Randall hesitated. His instinct screamed at him to deny everything, but he knew better. Michael Lawson wouldn't have shown up unless he already knew the truth. "That decision was within company policy," Randall replied, choosing his words carefully. "Employees are not permitted to cover costs for customers. It was a clear violation." Michael chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Let me tell you what I see, Mr. Randall." Michael took a step closer, his voice lowering, but somehow more powerful. "I see a man who values money over integrity, a man who fired one of his hardest-working employees for an act of kindness. And worst of all," Michael leaned in slightly, "I see a man who just made the biggest mistake of his career." Randall's smile faltered. "With all due respect, Mr. Lawson, this is a private business matter. I fail to see how this concerns you." Michael's smirk deepened. "You fail to see a lot of things, Randall. But don't worry. I'm about to clear that up for you." Before Randall could respond, one of Michael's assistants stepped forward, handing him a thick folder. Michael casually flipped it open, revealing documents, detailed reports, financial records, and internal complaints. "You see, Mr. Randall, before coming here, I did a little digging. I don't just react, I investigate. And what I found..." Michael's eyes darkened. "Well, let's just say corporate won't be happy." Randall's face drained of color. What are you talking about?" Michael tapped the folder. "Fraudulent charges, employee mistreatment, workplace violations, and, of course, multiple ignored complaints from customers and staff about your unethical leadership." He snapped the folder shut. "Shall I continue?" Randall's breathing grew uneven. He had been so sure that firing Jake would be just another decision, another move to maintain control over his employees. But now, his entire career was hanging by a thread, and Michael was about to cut it. The store remained silent, everyone hanging on to every word. Employees whispered among themselves. Customers pulled out their phones to record what was happening. Michael wasn't done yet. "Effective immediately," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm personally recommending your termination to the corporate board, and given the overwhelming evidence, I don't think you'll have a chance to defend yourself." Randall stumbled back slightly, his hands clenching into fists. This couldn't be happening. He had run this store for years. He had always had control, and now, in just minutes, it was being ripped away from him. You can't do this," he spat, desperation seeping into his voice. "You don't have the authority." Michael tilted his head slightly. "Oh, but I do. You see, I don't just own companies. I own shares in this company, and as of last night I've acquired a controlling interest in this store's parent corporation." The revelation hit like a bombshell. The employees and customers gasped, their murmurs turning into outright disbelief. Randall staggered. That's not possible." Michael gave him a cold smile. "You should have done your research before messing with my family, Randall. Now, get out of my store." Randall stood frozen, his face a mask of shock and humiliation. Michael turned slightly, gesturing toward the employees. "From this moment forward, Evergreen Market will operate under new leadership. Employee rights will be protected, and acts of kindness," he smiled, "they'll be rewarded, not punished." The crowd erupted into applause. Randall's hands trembled. He had been untouchable for years, yet here he was, powerless, defeated. Michael gave him one final look before turning to Jake, who had just stepped forward from the back of the store. "This store needs people with integrity, Jake," Michael said. "So, what do you say? Want your job back?" Jake met his gaze, but this time he wasn't just a cashier. He was a man who had stood up for what was right and won. He took a deep breath and nodded. "I'd be honored." Randall stormed toward the exit, pushing past the crowd. But as he reached the door, he heard Michael's final words. "One more thing, Randall." The disgraced manager turned, his face burning with rage. Michael smirked. "I don't think you'll be getting any glowing recommendations." With that, Randall disappeared, his reign officially over. And for the first time in a long time, Evergreen Market felt like a place of hope again. As Randall shoved his way through the store doors, his once commanding presence reduced to nothing. A sense of finality washed over the employees and customers still gathered inside. It was over. The man who ruled with intimidation and greed had finally fallen. Jake Carter stood near the checkout counters, still trying to process what had just happened. Less than 48 hours ago, he had been fired and humiliated for an act of kindness. Now, he had not only reclaimed his job, but he had done so with the backing of one of the most powerful men in the business world. Michael Lawson turned toward the employees and addressed them directly. "This store will no longer be run by fear. Kindness and integrity will define how it operates moving forward. You all deserve a workplace where you're valued." The employees looked at each other, relief evident in their eyes. Many of them had felt trapped under Randall's rule, but now, with new leadership, hope had returned. One of the cashiers, an older woman named Linda, stepped forward hesitantly. "Does this mean we'll finally get fair wages?" she asked. Michael smiled. "Starting today, everyone in this store gets a wage increase. No more exploitation. No more fear." The employees broke into cheers, their excitement filling the store with an energy it hadn't felt in years. Change was happening, and it was real. As the commotion settled, Michael turned back to Jake. "I meant what I said earlier, Jake. I don't just want you back as an employee. I want you as part of this store's future." Jake raised an eyebrow, uncertain of what Michael meant. "I'm listening," Michael continued. "I've been looking for people like you. Honest, hardworking, willing to do the right thing even when it's hard. I want you to run this place. Store manager. Full authority to make sure this place is everything it should be." Jake's mouth fell open slightly. Him? A manager? He had never imagined himself in a leadership position. But at that moment, he realized something important. He had spent years watching people like Randall abuse power. Maybe it was time for someone different to take the reins. Someone who actually cared. He looked around the store, at the employees, at the customers who had supported him. Then he looked at Emily, who gave him a soft nod of encouragement. He turned back to Michael and extended his hand. "I'll do it, but only on one condition." Michael smirked. "Name it. We use this place to help people. No one gets fired for being kind ever again." Michael's smirk turned into a genuine smile. He shook Jake's hand firmly. "Deal." As the store celebrated, Emily stood quietly in the background, holding baby Liam close to her chest. So much had changed in such a short time, and she was still trying to wrap her mind around it. She had spent the last year struggling alone, afraid to go back to her father, afraid she'd be forced into a life she didn't want. But now, after seeing how her father stood up for Jake, how he chose compassion over control, she knew she had misjudged him. She stepped toward him slowly. "Dad." Michael turned, his expression softening instantly. "I don't know if I can forgive everything overnight," she admitted, her voice shaky but honest. "But I can see now that you really do care." Michael's eyes glistened slightly as he nodded. "That's all I want, sweetheart. I just want you to be safe, to have choices." Emily inhaled deeply, then glanced at Jake. "And I want to make my own choices. But I also want you in Liam's life. He deserves to know his grandfather." Michael let out a deep breath, a weight visibly lifting off his shoulders. Nothing would make me happier. For the first time in years, they weren't just a broken family, they were healing. News of what happened at Evergreen Market spread fast. The internet had already latched onto Jake's story, turning him into a symbol of standing up for what's right. Local reporters arrived at the store, eager to hear more about how one cashier's kindness led to a corporate shakeup. Customers started returning, not just because of the changes, but because they believed in what the store now represented. Even Jake's old co-workers, who had once been afraid to speak out, started stepping forward with their own stories of mistreatment under Randall. They finally felt safe to share the truth. More than that, the story sparked a larger conversation about corporate greed and compassion in the workplace. It wasn't just about a grocery store anymore. It was about how people should be treated everywhere. Later that evening, after the crowds had died down, Jake stepped outside the store and took a deep breath of the crisp night air. Everything had changed so quickly. Just yesterday, he had been jobless, uncertain, and questioning if he had done the right thing. Now, he was running the store he had once been fired from. He had helped take down a corrupt leader. He had made a difference. Emily walked up beside him, cradling Liam. "Crazy couple of days, huh?" she murmured. Jake chuckled. "Yeah, never thought a simple act of kindness would lead to all this." She smiled. "I think that's the point. Kindness always comes back to you in ways you never expect." Jake looked up at the sky, feeling the weight of those words. Maybe she was right. Maybe doing the right thing wasn't about instant rewards. Maybe it was about trusting that good always finds its way back. Either way, he had no regrets. He turned back to Emily and smiled. "Ready to build something great?" She nodded. "Let's do it." And as they walked back into the store, Jake knew that this wasn't just the end of a fight. It was the beginning of something better. As Jake and Emily stepped back into the store, the once dim fluorescent lights now seemed to shine a little brighter. The atmosphere had shifted. No longer a place of fear, but of hope, fairness, and integrity. Employees smiled as they restocked shelves. Customers chatted warmly. And, for the first time in years, Evergreen Market felt like a place where people mattered. Jake stood at the front, looking at the store he had once been forced to leave in disgrace. Now he ran it. He turned to Emily, who gently bounced baby Liam in her arms. She smiled at him, and Jake realized something important. He wasn't just working a job anymore. He was part of something bigger. This isn't just a story about one man standing up for what's right. It's about how small acts of kindness can change everything. Jake lost his job for helping a struggling mother, but in the end, that one decision led to justice, change, and a better future. Would you have done the same? Do you think Randall got what he deserved? Let us know in the comments below. If you believe in standing up for what's right, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful, real-life inspired stories. Because in a world that often rewards greed, kindness is the real victory. See you in the next inspiring story.